Good morning and welcome to this week number 6 of the class of Job. Let's start with prayer. Let us pray. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Amen. Well, good morning. I've taken up your suggestion last week to just record the class because it's apparently easier to call back later and easier to listen to and apparently less technical. I know that means on my part, but that's okay. So if you have questions or comments, please put them in email form and I will try to address them on the next week. That's deantaylor1955 at gmail.com. deantaylor1955. Today we deal with Elihu, but then I want to leap into that very important part of Job, the voice from the whirlwind, and also to remind you that to please be reading through the Harold Kushner book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, because that is directly related to the whirlwind. So today we deal with Elihu. Elihu chapters 32 through 37. You know, you can almost take out the whole Elihu section and the book would still make sense. In fact, most scholars think that Elihu was a later addition. If you look at before Elihu and where it says on chapter 31, the words of Job have ended, and you go directly to God's answer from the whirlwind, it makes perfect sense. But we'll take a moment to see what Elihu is about. First, just to note, why do we think that Elihu is a later author? Well, the Hebrew scholars tell us that the Hebrew poetry is not nearly as beautiful or profound, and even the arguments are not as crisp and clear. Some background, the word Elihu means, my God is he. He is my God. You got to wonder, is that a little, is that a little bit of a hint from the author that Elihu's words are more godly than the three friends? At some places, he almost sounds a little whirlwind-ish, if I can say that, a little like the whirlwind coming up. Maybe. He is Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite. The Buzite suggests that he is an Armenian living not far from Edom. For Buz or Buz, Genesis 22:21, is her brother of Uz, where Job is from. You got to love these names. The author now uses the literary device of sort of what we might call the young Turk, the youth who has heard these elders make a mess of this argument against God, and against Job actually, and he just can't stand it anymore. In chapter 32, the three friends cease to speak, and Elihu is angry at Job because he said he justified himself rather than God, which in a way is kind of true. That's what he does. So 32, he begins to speak. So these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then Elihu became angry. He justified himself rather than God. He was angry at Job's three friends because they had found no answer, though they had declared Job to be in the wrong. By the way, an ancient tradition reads because they had put God in the wrong. It's possible that the original said because they had put God in the wrong, and some editor thought that was just too scandalous. But anyway, now Elihu, in other words, you have different translations, ancient translations saying different things. Now Elihu had waited to speak to Job because they were older than he. But when Elihu saw there was no answer to the mouths of these three men, he became angry. I am young in years and your age, therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. And he goes on for 8 or 10 verses of justifying why he needs to speak. But in 33 verse 5, chapter 33 verse 5, he speaks. Answer me if you can. Set your words in order before me. Take your stand. See, before God, I am as you are. I too was formed from a piece of clay. No fear of me need terrify you. No pressure will not be heavy on you. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sound of your words. And then in verse 12, but in this you are not right. Flat out says it. Job, you're just wrong. I will answer you. God is greater than any mortal. Why do you contend against him, saying, he will answer none of my words? For God speaks in one way and in two, though people do not perceive it. See, what he's basically saying is, Job, God is speaking to you, but you're not hearing it. You're not hearing it, which is interesting. And then he goes on to this vision about a dream. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on mortals, while they slumber on their beds, then he opens their ears and terrifies them with warnings, that he may turn them aside from their deeds and keep them from pride, to spare their souls from the pit, their lives from traversing the river. They are also chastised with pain upon their beds and with continual strife in their bones, so that their lives loathe bread, etc., etc. And then he goes through what ought to happen. What ought to happen when people are in their pain. They are chastened. So this is this is the typical thing that he thinks should happen. Their flesh is wasted away, that it cannot be seen. Their bones, once visible, now stick out. This is pretty graphic. Their souls draw near the pit, and their lives to those who will bring death. And then this is interesting. He brings in this, the imagery of an angel or a mediator. Then if there should be for one of them an angel, a mediator, one of 1,000, one who declares a person upright, and he is gracious to that person and says, deliver him from going down into the pit. I have found a ransom. Let his flesh become fresh with youth. Let him return to the days of his youthful vigor. Then he prays to God and is accepted by him. He comes into his presence with joy, and God repays him for his righteousness. That person sings to others and says, I have sinned and perverted what was right, and it was not paid back to me. He has redeemed my soul from going down to the pit, and my life shall see the light. God indeed does all these things twice, 3 times with mortals. Pay heed, Job, listen to me. So what he's saying here then is that this is the typical kind of thing that people do with their pain. They come before God and confesses, God, I have sinned. I know my place, and then God rewards that. Now, first of all, is this really Job's situation? I think the answer is no. Why? Because he's not sinned. I mean, that's the whole point. That's the whole point of Job's argument, that his suffering does not in any way equal whatever sin he might have committed. And you remember, that's kind of what the 3 friends have said. What righteous person ever suffered? And Job says, me. So some of that is kind of what the friends have said. But he does emphasize something that's interesting. So verse 35 is more the same. To Elihu, suffering is the chastening of God. Suffering is the way that God has for pushing us to grow in ways that we wouldn't have grown otherwise. So I think we can say 2 things about Elihu's argument. First, we can say that it too fails the test of being an answer to theodicy. Why do the innocent suffer? Why do bad things happen to good people? It just doesn't answer that. It just doesn't answer that. However, we can also say a second thing about this argument. can we say that to some extent, in some situations, it's valid and true? I want to read a meditation by the Franciscan priest and writer Richard Rohr about how we regard suffering in a healthy way. I will have this available to you if you'd like to email me. It's from one of his daily meditations. This one was September 18th, 2020. It's called Transforming Your Pain. If I were to name the Christian religion, I would probably call it the way of the wound. Jesus agrees to be the wounded one, and we Christians are these strange believers in a wounded healer. We come to God not through our strength, but through our weakness. We learn wisdom and come to God not by doing it all right, but through doing it all wrong. If you were going to create a religion, would you think of creating as your religious image a naked, bleeding, wounded man? It is the most unlikely image for God, the most illogical image for omnipotence. None of us in our wildest imagination would have come up with it. It must expose a central problem of human existence, for God to come into the world in this form and in this way. Sadly, we Christians have become accustomed to the cross. Perhaps we have domesticated it, and we no longer receive the shock and the scandal of all that this image of failure is saying. Being wounded, suffering, and dying are the quickest and most sure paths to truly living. Using a scapegoat is our much preferred method. We deny our pain, sins, and suffering and project them elsewhere. This ancient method still works so well that there is no reason to think it's going to end or change. Until we are enlightened by grace, we don't even see it. It remains safely hidden in the unconscious where it plays itself out. Once we spot and stop the pattern, the game is over. The cross of Jesus was a mirror held up to history so we could spot the scapegoating pattern and then stop participating in it. Only the great self, the true self, the God self, can carry the anxiety within us. The little self can't do it. People who don't pray can't live the gospel because the self is not strong enough to hold the anxiety and the fear. And this is the key sentence in the whole thing. If we do not transform our pain, we will always transmit it. If we do not transform our pain, we will always transmit it. Always someone else has to suffer because we don't know how to suffer. That's what it comes down to. Most people are like electric wires. What comes in is what goes out. Someone calls us a name and we call them a name back. That is, most people pass on the same energy that is given to them. Now compare an electric wire to those big gray transformers that you see on utility poles. Dangerous current or voltage comes in, but something happens inside that gray box, and what comes out is, in fact, now helpful and productive. That is exactly what Jesus does with suffering. That is what Jesus did. He did not return the negative energy directed at him, not during his life nor when he hung on the cross. He held it inside and made it into something much better. That is how, quote, he took away the sins of the world, unquote. He refused to pass it on. Until the world understands that, there will be no new world. There is a truth to this that I think Elihu may be driving at. Even though it does not really answer the question of theodicy, I think there is wisdom here that it's important to acknowledge. So, now we come to the climax of the book of Job. And I know we are a week ahead of this in your reading, but now we come in your reading next week to God's answer in the book of Job. Your reading for next week, along with the Kushner book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, and it's very important that you read those in conjunction, because the Kushner book depends on the voice from the whirlwind for Kushner's answer. I'm going to read a part of it aloud in a moment from the New Translation from Robert Alter, and I want you to first just enjoy the sheer beauty of the poetry. It's like a poetic, in a sense, a re-celebration of the creation of the world, and the imagery is like nowhere else, even in Genesis. Look for a couple of things in your hearing. Remember back to Job's dark death wish poetry from early on, his images of death and darkness. The voice from the whirlwind answers those images with images of light. The unusual phrase, "Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" Who is this that's a reference back to that death wish poetry. And also look for what Robert Alter calls a narrative progression of subjects. It goes from big to little, from cosmology, verses 4 through 21, to meteorology, verses 22-38, to zoology, 38-39 to 39-40. Which is to say, says Alter, the panorama of living creatures in the play of the natural forces of creation. And then, from verse 40 to 41, to zoology with a mythic heightening, and that's where, in some of those places, we get the wonderful, the Leviathan, which God made for the sport of it. One of my favorite phrases in the whole Bible. Why did God make these creations? Why did he make the Leviathan? Just for the hell of it, as we would say, just for the sport of it. And that's, like I say, that's one of my favorite phrases in the whole Bible of why we were created, just for the fun of it, for the sport of it. So as a preview to next week, let's read, and I'll read the new translation from Robert Alter. And the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, and he said, "Who is this that darkens counsel in words without knowledge? Gird your loins like a man, that I may ask you, and you can inform me. Where were you when I founded earth? Tell if you know understanding. Who fixed its measures? Do you know? Or who stretched a line upon it? In what were its sockets sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Who hedged the sea with double doors when it gushed forth from the womb, when I made cloud its clothing and thick mists its swaddling bands? I made breakers upon it my limit and set a bolt with double doors. And I said, thus far come no farther. Here halt the surge of your waves. Have you ever commanded the morning, appointed the dawn to its place, to seize the earth's corners, that the wicked be shaken from it? It turns like sealing clay, takes color like a garment, and their light is withdrawn from the wicked, and the upraised arm is broken. Have you come into the springs of the sea, in the bottommost deep walked about? Have the gates of death been laid bare to you? In the gates of death's shadow have you seen? Did you take in the breath of the earth? Tell if you know all. Where is the way that light dwells? In darkness, where is its place, that you might take it to its home and understand the paths to its house? You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. A little sarcasm. Have you come into the storehouse of snow? The storehouse of hail have you seen, which I keep for a time of strife, for a day of battle and war? By what way does the west wind fan out, the east wind whip over the earth, who split a channel for the torrent and a way for the thunderstorm, to rain on a land without man, wilderness bare of humankind, to sate the desolate dunes and make the grass sprout there? Does the rain have a father? Or who begot the drops of dew? From whose belly did the ice come forth? To the frost of the heavens who gave birth. Water congeals like stone, and the face of the deep locks hard. Can you tie the bands of the Pleiades, or loose Orion's reins? Can you bring constellations out in their season, lead the great bear and her cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you fix their rule on earth? Can you lift your voice in a cloud that the water spate cover you? Can you send lightning bolts on their way, and they will say to you, "Here we are"? Who placed in the hidden parts wisdom, or who gave the mind understanding? Who counted the skies in wisdom, and the jars of the heaven who tilted when the dust melts into a mass and the clods cling fast together? Can you hunt prey for the lion, fill the king of beasts' appetite? When it crouches in its den, lies in ambush in the covert? Who readies the raven's prey when its young cry out to God and stray, deprived of food? Do you know the mountain goat's birth time? Do you mark the calving of the gazelles? Do you number the months till they come to term and know their birthing time? They crouch, burst forth with their babes. Their young they push out into the world. Their offspring batten, grow big in the wild. They go out and do not return. Who set the wild ass free? The onager's reins who loosed? Whose home I made in the steppes, his dwelling place, flats of salt. He scoffs at the bustling city. The driver shouts, he does not hear. He roams mountains for his forage, and every green thing he seeks. Will the wild ox want to serve you? Pass the night at your feeding trough? Bind the wild ox with cord for the furrow. Will he harrow the valleys behind you? Can you rely on him with his great power and leave your work, your labor to him? Can you trust him to bring back your seed, gather grain on your threshing floor? The ostrich's wing joyously beats. Is the pinion, the plume, like the stork's? For she leaves her eggs on the ground, and in the dust she lets them warm. And she forgets that a foot can crush them and a beast of the field stomp on them. Harsh abandons her young to a stranger. In vain her labor without fear. For God made her forgetful of wisdom, and he did not allot her insight. Now the height she races, she scoffs at the horse and its rider. Do you give might to the horse? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Do you make his roar like locusts? His splendid snort is terror. He churns up the valley exulting, in power goes out to the clash of arms. He scoffs at fear and is undaunted, turns not back before the sword. Over him rattles the quiver, the blade, the javelin, and the spear. With clamor and clatter he swallows the ground and ignores the trumpet sound. If the trumpet says, "Aha!" and from afar he scents a fray, the thunder of captains, the shouts. Does the hawk soar by your wisdom, spread his wings to fly away south? By your word does the eagle mount and set his nest on high? On the crag he dwells and beds down, on the crest of the crag his stronghold. From there he seeks out food from afar. His eyes look down, his chicks lap up blood. Where the slain are, there he is. And the Lord answered Job, and he said, will he who disputes with Shaddai be reproved? Who argues with God, let him answer. And Job answered the Lord and said, look, I am worthless. What can I say back to you? My hand I put over my mouth. Once I have spoken and will not answer. Twice I will not go on. And the Lord answered from Job from the whirlwind, and he said, gird your loins like a man. Let me ask you, and you will inform me. Will you indeed thwart my case, hold me guilty, so you can be right? If you have an arm like God's, and with a voice like his, you can thunder, put on pride and preeminence, and grandeur and glory on. Let loose your utmost wrath. See every proud man, bring him low. See every proud man, make him kneel. Tramp on the wicked where they are, bury them in the dust together. Shut them up in the grave. And I, on my part, shall acclaim you, for this right hand triumphs for you. Pray, look, Behometh, whom I made with you, grass like cattle he eats. Look, pray, the power in his loins, the virile strength in his belly muscles. He makes his tail stand like cedar. Moving on. Can you draw a Leviathan with a hook and with a cord press down his tongue? Could you put a lead line in his nose and with a fish hook pierce his cheek? Would you urgently entreat him? Would he speak to you gentle words? Would he seal a pact with you that you take him as lifelong slave? Could you play with him like a bird and leash him for your young women? Could hucksters haggle over him, divide him among traders? Could you fill his skin with darts and fishermen's net with his head? Just put your hand upon him. You will no more recall how to battle. And so on. We have one more chapter, and I'll leave that to you to read and just consider. This is the answer. This is the answer of the book of Job. Does this answer the question of theodicy? If yes, what is that answer? If no, then what? We're going to talk next week about that. We're going to talk about how Kushner interprets the voice from the whirlwind, which is very, very interesting and unique. And we will move on from there. So, let's go to worship.